What I'm going to just
Everybody, and welcome to the May 2022 meeting of the Dubai Natural History Group. We had hoped that this evening would inaugurate our return to in-person meetings, but we have postponed that in deference to the period of mourning for the late president of the UAE, Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who has been the president since the mid-2000s, and it's been an eventful period for the UAE and for all of us who've been there. We extend our condolences to the family of Sheikh Khalifa, but also to the nation as a whole. We're privileged, nevertheless, to be able to continue as planned with our lecture using the remote Zoom facilities. The fact that we are going at all and continuing this on a monthly basis is a tribute particularly to our speaker coordinator, Michelle Sinclair, who has been working, I want to say tirelessly, to recruit speakers and to make sure that the meetings happen. And we were prepared for in-person and a hybrid meeting along with the IT staff at Emirates Academy of Hospitality Management, where we have our meetings. So they had put in some what will now be advance effort on our behalf this evening. Our next meeting in June, the program is still to be decided. It's not completely open. We're working on a choice between two possibilities, and the date is. Am I correct that it's the what is the date for the June meeting? Do we have that fixed yet, Michelle? I think not. So it'll be a watch this space, and as usual, we'll be in touch with you by e-communication. At the same time, we have field trip programs going out. The night trip into the desert was canceled for this weekend, but will go out next weekend, and we have people also headed for a cultural tour of Greece. I'm going to I haven't looked through to see who's with us tonight. The Dubai Natural History Group is an all-volunteer, non-profit membership organization. Our lectures over the last 35 years have always been open to the public, and that continues. But if you think that we're worth supporting, memberships are one of Dubai's biggest bargains at 50 dirhams for a year for individuals and 100 for family memberships. That gets you on our newsletter list and the opportunity to join in our field trips. The lectures, as I said, are always public. We're very pleased and privileged to have as our speaker tonight Kathleen Swalling. Those of you who have looked at her biography will have seen that we have, if nothing else, a well-rounded individual. She has worked as a lawyer for the Australian government. She has worked in making documentary films, and she is a diver. She obviously, I know from conversation before the meeting, is well acquainted with Australia's Great Barrier Reef. And in her current incarnation, she is an advisor to governments and NGOs in connection with environmental regulation, and particularly regulations relating to the ocean and fisheries. And if I've got it wrong, Kathleen, or given you too much credit, you can on your own. She's going to be talking to us this evening with the assistance of her colleague Jamie Molker, who is sitting in is it Amsterdam?
Groningen.
Okay. And so I'm going to leave it to them to parcel things out, and I will turn the floor over to Kathleen Swalling.
Thank you very much, Gary. And I think you got it right. Current incarnation, yes. So I actually studied science and arts and law somehow, so that kept me fairly much a generalist. So I will say I am a generalist, but the common thread has always been relating to the marine and coastal environment, and how we go about effectively protecting that and balancing the needs and interests of the various stakeholders and industries that may impact upon it. So I'm very lucky to be joined by Jamie. Jamie's been working with us. We've done a large project for Saudi Arabia recently. Jamie's interests and actually expertise is in fisheries and aquaculture. He's an incredible person to be out at sea with. He's taught me a lot about the fish in the UAE, and we've been fortunate enough to go out on some of the UAE dolphin surveys together and also do some sailing as well. But he's a great adjunct to us, and we're working on a small project on Moon Island together, which he'll talk to and we'll talk to you later on. So thank you very much for having us. And so our background, we tend to advise on large scale change. So when a government is looking at making big sweeping changes in terms of their legal frameworks, how they might go about that, both from the design perspective, but right through to the implementation and compliance, so that the protected areas or the areas that you're developing will actually have effective outcomes rather than just be on a piece of paper. So I'll move forward now. Just got a little icebreaker for you. Hope that appeals to some of the quirky sense of humours. The Aurora Australis, no longer with us, but the Antarctic science vessel and supply vessel to the Australian Antarctic divisions. So our background, I've mentioned a little bit for nature-based. We have another colleague with us. He's not with us today, but he works with us on looking at the legal frameworks as well. We do what's called marine spatial planning with a particular focus on marine protected areas and the development of them. So marine spatial planning is looking at how you overlay the different users of the marine environment. So it's not just about the protection of the marine and coastal ecosystems, but how you manage the different uses in those areas. And the other thing we work on is, particularly on the reef, but in other areas, like I've worked in Costa Rica as well with large turtle areas, how when you have encroaching developments or tourism, if you can work in a preventative way to get them to be developed in a way, say turtles, for example, not building right on the shore with lights and things like that. So we look at building partnerships across organizations like yourself, but with tourism or developers, hotels, and government, and look to form sort of alliances or governance arrangements that will bring out better outcomes for the environment while addressing the development requirements. And then we also look at the communications and compliance components. A little overview of what we'll talk about today, and we'll talk about progress and preservation. I wanted to introduce this concept of one ocean. This is something that's been coming up in some of the science. It's been there a while, but I think it's becoming more prevalent in the science and management is discussing the ocean as one ocean. And then we'll address key pressures. I'm sure many of you are aware of the pressures on our oceans, but we'll just address and highlight them, and then we'll drill down them more into the UAE waters, talk a little bit about and identify where some of the marine protected areas are, and then talk about some of the solutions and a little case study, if we have time, that we're working on for Moon Island. So if has anyone seen this? I mean, I'm not sure, I guess I'm talking with you, but I don't know if people have seen this Spillhouse projection of the world's oceans, but if you look at the ocean from this perspective, I think this was generated maybe in the 60s, this sort of map. I only came across it this year, so that gives you an idea of how this concept of one ocean has been around, but is coming more to the forefront. Now, the Antarctic is seen to be the center, and the Southern Ocean we talk about as the heart or the pump. And if I was a drop of water in the Southern Ocean, it would take me 1,000 years to come back to a start point. So it would take 1,000 years for one drop of water to travel around our world's ocean. And I think the importance of understanding as one ocean is understanding that the interconnectivity of the marine environment, and also that what I do here, or what is done in one area, or what we do in terms of climate change, impacts on the entire ocean. And I won't go into the sort of the oceanographer side. I'm definitely a generalist, and I tend to bring in and work with all sorts of experts like Jamie and others, and we look at bringing those solutions together. But there's some amazing, if you want to look into this more, they talk about the conveyor belts and looking at the ocean currents. It's well worth exploring. So in terms of the key pressures on our oceans, they do evolve, but climate change for me, if I was to say, I know that we have a lot of talk about plastics, but if I was to say I wanted one thing to do for the ocean, I would suggest that it's minimizing our emissions and shifting the global emissions and reducing them would be the biggest impact in terms, because the issue with climate change is that the impacts become cumulative. They impact on all sorts of things in terms of you're getting eutrophication, acidification from the warming. You are impacting on coral reefs, but also on krill, and the importance of these to the ocean's oxygen supply is for me, it's just the main issue that we need to deal with. But I know that there's a lot of focus on plastics, so we can talk about water quality and pollution in terms of plastics, but sometimes I get concerned that we're not focused enough on climate change as an issue, and so I see that as the #1 issue and pressure on our ocean, and going to have the most negative impact and the thing where we can have the most positive impact by addressing that. Water quality pollution, plastics, yes, but we also need to think about sediments, runoff. A lot of the issues, and this is why when we address marine issues, we're often looking at land pollution sources and the legislation relating to sources coming from land pollution as much as oil spills and other things like that. Fisheries and aquaculture, Jamie will talk to that in a little moment, so I won't deal with that, but it's a big issue. So I started as a fisheries prosecutor, and we had a zero tolerance policy, and it saved 2 fisheries in the state that I was working with, which now are still operating. I think that was in the early 90s, and those fisheries were close to being, well, they were unsustainable and close to being finished. So they are now still operating. That shows that if you do adopt strong legislation and you enforce it with a strong approach, you can recover the fish stocks, both for the fishermen, but also just for the biodiversity and for divers and tourism, those sorts of things. Shipping's a big issue in terms of obviously oil spills are a great risk, but we also, other things that people don't think about is the noise pollution and the impacts that has on whale migrations. There's some incredible graphics out there, I think, of a blue whale and showing the shipping channels around the world and the blue whale moving away from the shipping channels. I know in Sri Lanka, the blue whales there, the fishermen are going further out to get the fish, and then the whales are right near the shipping channel. I don't know if anybody's had the wonderful opportunity to go there on tour, but I did, and we had ships stopping fishermen and tourism boats all in the same area while we had 5 individual blue whales. So these are things that need to be addressed at international levels and come to a greater understanding about how we could better manage those. And then deep sea mining, this is an emerging issue, and it's a challenging one because the issue with deep sea mining, it's been quite an issue this year. There's been one conference of parties in New York. There'll be another one in August relating to how we're going to protect marine biodiversity in the high seas area. But deep sea mining occurs in what we call the exclusive economic zone, which is an area that nations have exploitative capacity, but also responsibilities to conserve and protect out to 200 nautical miles. So deep sea mining involves bringing out minerals from the seabed. Now, the thing is, the minerals that are there at the moment are things like cobalt, nickel, manganese, and there isn't enough supply to deal with the emerging requirements for green technologies on land. So the deep sea is being looked at, and there's a number of explorative licenses already being granted, and it's very much a hot issue. There's an international seabed authority is charged both with giving these licenses out, but also with setting up environmental impact assessments in relation to them. So it's a very challenging issue and something I need to look more into, but it's a concern because that's our green technologies are our way out of the climate change situation, and yet they rely on these minerals. And if people go to the deep sea to find them to deal with, for example, I think the UK, to meet its targets in relation to no longer only selling electric vehicles, I think from 2030, my understanding is that there isn't enough minerals on land just to meet the UK's strategy. So somewhat of a concern and something perhaps for all of us to look into more. And then, of course, biodiversity loss, that we all know that climate change is impacting upon that. I'd also address the fact that population is ever increasing. We are only on one planet. It is finite. And, you know, at some point, there will just be too many of us. So I think it's interesting that conversation is difficult to come to light. It's a very challenging one, but something that maybe, yeah, it's a difficult one, but I think it's something that we need to start considering, and maybe not just placing people on Mars, but there's only so much land, so much water, and there's a lot of people. So lots of different solutions I know people are coming up with in terms of technologies. We saw a lot out at Expo, which was quite interesting to see the different solutions coming to the forefront. Jamie, I'm going to just introduce Jamie again. He's a Bachelor of Science in Biology. He's studying at the moment at the University of Groningen.
Yeah.
Thank you. And as I said, he's a wonder to go to sea with. Jamie, if you can talk to us about the fishing, that'd be great.
Yeah. So yeah, pressures of fishing. So fishing causes huge amounts of pressure on mainly the ecosystems themselves. So I have an image like underneath here, and you can see before and after trolling. And yeah, there's a massive loss of biodiversity between it's the same side, but between the two pictures. And yeah, obviously that means less fish every time you go fishing, basically. So it doesn't recover in time. And yeah, huge loss of biodiversity and structures as well on the bottom. Yeah, and then ghost nets. So ghost nets are extremely, yeah, how do I say it?
Destructive.
Yeah, extremely destructive. But they're like, it's never ending unless they're taken out of the water, because like a fish will get stuck in a net, and as you can see, a sea lion obviously went to try eat that fish in the net but became entangled himself, and then a shark will try eat that sea lion, and then that shark will get stuck in the net. So it's a never ending cycle of yeah, things dying trying to eat the things caught in the net. Yeah, and then these ghost net cycles are yeah, a huge driver for the loss of keystone species such as sharks. So sharks are a keystone species because they maintain all the basically they maintain the balance in the ecosystem, right? So they're eating all the smaller fish that overpopulate or yeah, throw their own ecosystem out of balance, right? So losing these sharks and whales as well, sea lions, turtles, could have huge effects for fishing and the ocean in general. So yeah.
And we'll talk later about some of the solutions that the Abu Dhabi Emirate came up with. Now, just talk about the aquaculture pressures, Jamie.
Yeah. So most aquaculture done nowadays is done in the water in these huge, yeah, either nets or yeah, these ponds. And these ponds are located in the mangroves. So they've actually reduced, in countries such as Thailand, they've reduced their mangroves by about 70% to make way for these aquaculture ponds, right? But mangroves are carbon sinks. So they remove huge amounts of carbon from the ocean. And they also provide flood barriers for hurricanes and tsunamis. So without the mangroves, like countries such as Thailand and Indonesia, I think they were doing it as well. Yeah, it could get absolutely swamped by a tsunami because they've removed their mangroves. So it's quite destructive. Like it's destructive right now, but it could also be destructive in the future. So yeah. And also the overuse of antibiotics in aquaculture. So there's a lot of fish in aquaculture ponds, so bacteria spreads extremely rapidly. And so they have to use antibiotics to lose less fish, right? But if any of these fish escape into the wild, or even you see them in these nets, right? The antibiotics can just flow out of the system and into the waterways, but that can lead to antibiotic resistance bacteria, absolutely decimating fish stock. So it's basically another ticking time bomb. And escaped fish can cause catastrophic damage to local ecosystems by just completely eliminating whatever they can easiestly catch, and then to manage all of this would be the best way to do would have a completely closed system. So aquaculture is right now, the way we're doing it right now, it's pressurizing our oceans. But if we do it if we manage it correctly in a closed system, we could actually relieve an enormous amount of pressure from our oceans, right? But we're just not doing it right now. But as technology advances, I reckon we'd have a good shot at relieving pressure from our oceans using aquaculture. So, yeah.
And if I can add to that, because the solution, a lot of people are looking for food security, particularly in the GCC region, at aquaculture as a solution. Now, a couple of things. One is there are other solutions, and we're going to talk more about that. We talk about marine protected areas, which will potentially they can restore fish stocks, but they also provide spillover. So we'll talk more about that later. The other thing I wanted to just my experience with aquaculture in South Australia. So when I was working there with the fisheries teams there, what was happening was with the tuna, they had them in these large nets. They brought the aquaculture in from further out, and this actually brought the great white sharks in as well, and also a lot of detritus that goes underneath the fishing nets. So the impacts of aquaculture on the behavior and habitat of other species needs to be considered. I know that I've been talking with Norway, and I know they are developing closed system aquaculture technology. They are in the process of it. So thank you. Thanks, Jamie.
No worries.
Yeah, we'll call more on Jamie a bit later. I know Gary's a lawyer, so I thought I better throw some law into the presentation. But for Saudi Arabia, for example, the number of laws we reviewed, it was a very quick project in my view, and a very high-level project. We reviewed 96 laws that impacted on the Saudi Arabian marine and coastal environment, and international laws. Most of the international law comes from the law of the sea in terms of the managing the oceans. However, there are many laws that impact and help to manage and protect the ocean. So we talk about the Convention on Biodiversity. You've all heard of the International Maritime Organization, which governs shipping. They're doing some actually great work and putting a lot of pressure on shipping in terms of biodiversity more recently. But I'm not an expert in shipping law. Often people think if you're a maritime lawyer, you are, but I'm not at all. There's plenty of people that work in that, but very influential organization, and one I would certainly want to have at the party to deal with issues like the blue whale situation off of Sri Lanka. United Nations climate change, obviously. I mentioned about the deep seabed, so I've put the International Seabed Authority, which this is the organization that's charged with both allowing their licenses for the mining and also managing the environmental impacts. Fortunately, there is another, it's called the High Seas Treaty, for short. And so it's a biodiversity treaty in fact that is looking at how we're going to protect the biodiversity, at least in the high seas component of the deep sea. I think that I'm just trying to remember, but there's a huge amounts of our ocean are actually deep sea. I just can't remember, but I'll get back to you on that. It's quite staggering the amount of ocean that is actually deep sea. CITES, so that's our Convention on Trade and Endangered Species. So you're not supposed to pick up a coral and take it home, or or I've seen when I was the president of Filmmakers for Conservation, I went to a BBC photographer's house, and he just happened to have a turtle from Africa in his garden, and it's just like, people seem to think that picking up a species and taking it home is a great idea, but no, that's not what's supposed to happen. So please discourage it in any organizations that you're aware of. There's also some regional agreements which have varying successes. The two that are important to this region, Pergska and Rockme, and that's probably enough law for you today. Progress and preservation. I think when we talk about progress, often we think about development, but progress for me is also the fact that now we have these sustainable development goals. I mean, I've dedicated my whole life to the oceans and managing and protecting them. I mean, remember drawing pictures when I was 5 about how I would protect whales and keep good oxygen to the ocean and things like that. So for me, seeing the sustainable development goals being not only implemented by the UN, but watching each nation and corporates in terms of adopting them in the UN Global Compact has been wonderful to see. And I really have a lot of hope that we've got guidance about how we can, as organizations, develop sustainably. And so if you are running an organization, involved on the board of an organization, these sorts of things, you can look to the SDGs, and in fact, the UAE has a policy, and that certainly was evident at Expo as well, in the intent to implement the SDGs. Of course, when we talk about implementing environmental goals or strategies, we're always talking about continual improvement. And the one thing that I've seen over my career is that we can be, because of our limbic brains, we can look to criticize. But I think it's important when we look at, for example, environmental impact assessments for the reef, we're always looking at how the proponent can improve, what things that they can take to improve. So we're not saying you're wrong and everything's wrong, but how you can take your improvement, how you can increase the vegetation for birds, or how you can increase your fish stocks, or how you can increase your mangroves, these sorts of things. So I think of progress in terms of how we can walk about doing things more sustainably. The Costa Rican project that I worked on, I literally helped them develop a strategy because CNN went there, and all of a sudden everybody in the US wanted to buy land there. And until then, these turtles, the olive ridley turtles, had been coming up nesting. It was all fairly unknown or quiet tourism. So we worked with them to set a strategy immediately about where development could occur, how lighting could occur. So the progress was managed with preservation, and you can manage even with restoration, which is what Saudi's looking to do, to put in requirements to restore fish stocks or restore mangroves or these sorts of things. So yeah, the SDGs are a great guideline. Innovations and technologies. There's amazing innovations and technologies occurring. Most of you probably know, satellite technology used to look at coral reefs and biodiversity, tracking, satellite tracking of animals, vessel tracking, to know where fishing vessels are. Now with satellite tracking, we learn a lot about illegal fishing, but as I've mentioned, to clients, that we can deal with illegal fishing by tracking mobile phones. I mean, because people are going to turn on their mobile phones, and if they do, you can get an idea of where they are with the satellite technology, and you can look at that from a compliance perspective. The other thing that's come up, we've got an Italian friend of mine. She's studied all sorts of techniques. She's worked on for NASA, but she's also been working on her own project, which is about remote buoys and remote cameras on these buoys that she can move to different lat longs, like control them. So for example, in the UAE, something like that would be in the heat of summer. It's very hard to potentially do surveys. So you might have data that's maybe not consistent because you're not going out as much because of the heat, or you might not be able to get water quality samples or things like that. This sort of remotely operated surface vehicles can do that. So there's lots of different innovations and technology. And of course, there's also negative sides of innovation and technology that need to be managed. I had some quotes in here which I took out, but one of them was from Razan Al Nayan Mubarak, and I worked for her for a brief time. She offered me a job with her, but at the time I actually didn't think I would still be in the UAE. But she's quite a remarkable woman for those that have been fortunate enough to meet her. But she recently was elected as the second only woman to head the international or the World Conservation Union, so the IUCN. I think she's the first, I think she points it as Asian Arab woman, but the second woman, I think, in 87 years of history of the organization. And she talks about the fact that we should protect nature. And I know that most of the people on this call, if not all of them, will appreciate this, but just for its intrinsic nature, the fact that when we go into a forest, or we walk in the desert, or when we go and snorkel, the feeling we have before we go to these places very different from the feeling we have afterwards, the peace of mind, the well-being. And obviously there's a lot of scientific studies showing that nature, nature bathing, walking into a forest is better for our overall well-being and effectiveness. So in terms of the UAE, the UAE has a lot of policies. Obviously, there's some challenges with having different emirates having their own pathways. And I think what I've seen since I've been coming here and living here, I've seen a development in the federal management and framework, and I think it's a work in progress, but I'm seeing them pull together more federal frameworks, and I think that's quite exciting for the UAE. In terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, they have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development based on the Sustainable Development Goals. This report on the National Framework Statement for Sustainable Fisheries, done in conjunction with the Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, is a great one to look at if you're interested in fisheries. And there's been some excellent progress since that report. provided some advice to the UAE, particularly to the Environment Abu Dhabi, about the importance of engaging with the fishermen. And they've developed a lovely film about the process that they did there, and I think it's called Our Sea, Our Future. It's about a 30-minute documentary. It's on YouTube, and it's wonderful to see how they engaged with the fishermen. And this enabled them in Abu Dhabi to then make immediate closures to certain fisheries. So for those that don't know, the gargoyle that's pictured here, the hamor, and maybe Jamie can talk more to this, he understands fish behaviour, but the hamor, as I was told by Winston Cowie, who works with EAD, literally they swim in there within the first 2 minutes or something, and they're like, hello. And this is, you know, it's been very destructive to the hamor stock, and the fact that it's a prized fish. I think when I was advising Abu Dhabi, the stock was down to 5%. And now I believe last I spoke to Winston, it was up to about 35%. And they closed that fishery. They literally said no more gargoyle knots in Abu Dhabi waters. And that's really making big inroads in terms of the fish stocks there. And quite significant in a short space of time. And this is where fisheries closures, marine protected areas can provide the fish stocks. They can provide opportunities for tourism, which we'll talk to later. And Abu Dhabi is certainly taking that sort of stance. The other thing they did, and I think this came out of this framework as well, is I think they reduced some of the larger nets that Jamie was talking about, and they've seen that halving the mortality rate of dugong. For those that don't know, Abu Dhabi waters house the second largest population of dugong and the densest population of dugong in the world. So that's quite an important species, and it's quite a success they've had in terms of just making blanket closures or removal of nets. Some other things that the UAE has done, and this has been the federal ministry implementing the sustainable development strategy, the UAE Sustainable Development Strategy, particularly in relation to life below water, number 14, and life on land. I will see that they've got rehabilitation of coastal and marine habitat. So that's 3 pillars of that are increasing coral cover, so coral restoration, mangroves, and also introducing artificial reefs, which provide habitat for both corals and eventually fish as well. So they've achieved, the progress has probably progressed since this slide, and maybe their update on their website, but you can see the numbers are quite staggering in terms of 250,000 mangrove seedlings have been planted. They've planted 20,000 coral fragments. I know in Fujairah there's talk about planting, and there's some work going on. I think they're looking at 300,000 square kilometers of coral. They're trying to plant the largest coral reef of coral. I've seen some press on that, and I've spoken to a tourism operator that's involved. So they've started work with that. I think they're working with Dibba Bay oysters as well to use the oysters as structure for the young corals. So that's interesting. And they've deployed a large number of artificial reefs as well in an area that's it's 150 odd thousand square kilometers. So, and then the sustainable wildlife, the pillars in that include the Ramsar, but also the bird wildlife. And I think that even though we're talking about the marine environment here, I know that you the participants here will really understand the importance of bird life in the UAE. And I have some passions about birds because a colleague of that I worked with in the World Heritage Area, we did a lot of the vulnerability assessments, the strategic assessments for all the species, and then, apportioning resources. But he was quite, we'd be at VIP events and he would just drop to his knees and his binoculars looking at some bird walking under some table or something like that. So I learned a lot about birds and the importance of them. And them as, I think birds one of the examples, it's an overused statement, but canary in the coal mine. And what I've seen here, which is a little concerning, is this increase in the number of crows in the last 10 years. And we see the crows predating on some of the natives, birds and the smaller birds. And I think that's something that's a challenge to address. But it's something that I think that we need to be addressing here, because the bird species in the UAE are quite incredible. The migratory species that stop here, it really is something that I think the tourism in the UAE could look more to share, and a lot more communications out there just for residents to gain a greater appreciation of the bird life, not just the large birds like the flamingos, but the larger biodiversity of bird life that visits or exists in the UAE. We're very lucky. Just in terms of commitments, we've seen that the UAE has signed up to, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of the press releases from Dubai as well, about increasing the number of parks. We've seen large increases in terrestrial parks, but the UAE has signed up to the Global Oceans Alliance commitment to protecting 30% of the marine environment by 2030. So that's a commitment to SDG 14, but it's also a separate commitment that nations are signing up to. And I see from my interactions and meetings I've been involved with at the international level, but that is something that people are looking to push to have it implemented into the international law targets, if you like. It's not there yet, but they're working on that. What I would say about that, just before I move on, is it's great to have protected areas, but if they're not effectively managed from a point of view of actually providing that haven and capacity for restoration and increasing the biodiversity, and allowing access for managed access for people to be educated, but also to just experience the wonder of these places. I think that's something really important that needs to be addressed in a legislative framework and in communications, is how we can access these places, but manage them for the future. And that becomes something that becomes a tourism opportunity and the economic opportunity if it's managed well. In terms of marine and coastal protected areas, I've taken most of this from the federal site, the federal ministry site. However, I do understand that there are small pockets of protected areas, for example, Snoopy Island, that other emirates have set up. Now, so this is just a map of where the key sites are. There's some amazing videos online of each of these reserves on the federal website, the federal ministry website. And seriously, I was looking at them myself and I thought I need to get out there more. So it might be something that could be a visit field trip for the group to explore, particularly this Ras Granada It looks absolutely incredible. But some of the Marawa Biosphere Reserve is where the so we've got a little typo in there, but biosphere. But the Biosphere Reserve is where the dugong populations are said to be. I'm sure some of you know a lot more than I do, and probably have visited a lot more. I popped Moon Island down here. Moon Island has been apparently is a new reserve. I think the Dubai, the DMCA, so the Dubai, I should know it, Maritime Council Authority, something like that. They've declared that, and there's a little bit of confusion about what the rules are in there. That's hence Jamie and I are working on looking at what exists there, and hopefully we can help influence, because they've stopped snorkeling there, which is a bit of a shame. But they're allowing anchoring, and there's certainly people still fishing on one line there. They're not supposed to fish. But can I say, between the time they closed it and the times before when I went, the large fish that are now inside the bay, I'm sure the fish put out a call and everybody knows where to go when they don't want to get caught. So they're all the queen fish, Jamie, are inside Moon Island lately. Yeah, so so MPAs, they're really looking at, for me, what an MPA is, and just in case you don't know, the Great Barrier Reef is a marine protected area, but all sorts of things happen there. There's a major shipping route through there. There is still trawling in there. There's still netting. There's still line fishing, but it's all managed spatially. And what does happen is all the biota has been investigated. It took 3 years to investigate it, which, considering it's the area the size of Italy, that's not that long. And then the science says, if you want to protect the habitats of all the marine and all the plants and animals, basically what you're looking at doing is you're protecting the bioregions in which they live. You're protecting 30% of that, and you're protecting what we call replicate areas. So if there was a cyclone going through one area or an oil spill, there's still other areas where those plants and animals either rest, reproduce, feed, these sorts of things, and the plants that they feed on are protected as well. So an MPA isn't a no-go, no-take area. There are certainly 30% of that area is, and that is to protect all the biodiversity that's been identified in a preventative manner. But still activities can be managed, and you often do overlying of where those activities are, a lot of GIS mapping, and you work with, I know in our organizations we will have, like, I will work with someone like Jamie, but then I would work with someone in tourism, I would work with defense, and we would have all of these people involved in finalizing where the maps are and where certain activities can occur and when they can't. What is nice to see is a lovely document that's been produced by the Abu Dhabi Maritime Authority. I'll share that with you in a minute, and that actually has maps of the marine protected areas, but it's also letting people know what activities they can do there. My understanding is that last year at the Monaco yacht show, the super yacht show, that Abu Dhabi made announcements that they would be allowing access to these marine protected areas. But it looks like preemptively they've already developed anchorage areas, and these are for quite large vessels to sit outside, and then for them to run smaller vessels inside the marine protected areas. So they're actually designating where these vessels will go, and then have the vessels within the area and what activities can and can't be occurred. You'll be pleased to know, I'm sure, that jet skiing is prohibited. and just educating people in terms of safe anchoring practices. There's a whole, in terms of marine protected areas, there's a whole business that a nation can actually adopt by setting these areas up. There's so much work to do, but there's so much benefit. So for Australia, the Great Barrier Reef was worth billions in terms of tourism to Australia. And when we came up against the commercial fishing industry, it was actually very clear that the tourism value of having a good marine protected area was far more valuable economically than the actual fishing industries were. I think they were worth a few million. So getting that social science data behind these things helps to show, for example, if you were to put an MPA off of Dubai, you would probably, I know one of the dolphin species hasn't been sighted in the last year and a half, and there's some concerns that might be with how we go about reclaiming land. But once you have the data knowing where dolphins are, then you can have better planning practices for those sorts of things. As I said, it's always about continual improvement, but there's a lot of opportunity, financial opportunity for nature-based tourism. And I think after COVID, people are looking more for that sort of thing. And that's certainly where Saudi's focusing itself. I know they're going to close, I think, about 200 miles off of the Red Sea. And they've certainly brought a lot of people in that used to work for the Great Barrier Reef into Saudi, and a lot of experts from Woodhull and different experts from around the world. So they're quite serious and genuine in their vision to work out how they can develop in a more sustainable way that protects the Red Sea at least and restores as well. But we'll see how that goes. But safe snorkeling practices, that's something that, for example, Moon Island, they've said no snorkeling, but it would be quite easy to educate people with safe snorkeling practices, which is don't put your fins, don't stand on reefs, look, don't touch, float on the surface, you know, observe with your camera, you know, don't leave anything behind. There's some of the rules are in this lovely document, you know, in terms of don't release your ballast water, don't release you know, drop rubbish. I know I've spent a lot of time educating people in the sailing community. Fortunately, now everybody seems to be well on board, and I'm very much now promoting, you know, not throwing rubbish overboard and behaving, because often people look at the ocean and because they can't see underneath it, they don't think of it the same way they think of their garden or they think of when they go into a park. Exotic species, we've talked about aquaculture, but release of species through ballast water or through runoff. I know the Oceanographic Museum in Monaco incidentally released I think a tilapia into the Mediterranean that became a huge problem for the Mediterranean, and so little things can become big problems. Reporting, we're always looking for scientific reporting. Talked briefly with Gary before about citizen science, and we had a brief discussion about the value of certain reporting because it might not be peer reviewed or cross-checked, if you like. And I think for me, I see the importance of having peer-reviewed science and not popular as science. But I also think it's really important that humans are, you know, societies are engaged in processes, and this engagement process of everybody can report a turtle, everybody can report a seabird. And I think that helps people to start to understand the importance of those the wildlife and our impacts on them by being involved. So I'm always caught in this tension between the real science and the citizen science, but I think it's something that needs to be managed. But I think it's important that people like this group, for example, are given a voice, and the knowledge that and the history that this group has is shared more widely and becomes part of a national archive at a management level, if you like. So I think we've still got a little bit more time. Is that true, or are we out of time?
We can go on for a little bit more.
Could we just share, could I just get Jamie to share some of our videos from Moon Island and just talk a bit about that project?
We would like that.
It's
Yeah.
5 minutes. Yeah.
Yep.
It's the more interesting part.
Share screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, I can see Jamie Milk has started screen sharing.
All right. Is it playing?
No movie yet.
Try it again. Now it should be sharing.
Correct.
Yeah, so here we see a pharaoh cuttlefish mating. And this is at Moon Island. So the bigger one's a male and the smaller one's a female. And I have some more videos as well. Yeah, there's also at Moon Island. There's a bunch of parrotfish, and on those white fish with the blue stripes and the yellow, those are sergeant majors. No fish fact. And yeah,
Jamie.
some sort of butterfly fish.
We can't.
Oh, it's my
We can't.
Jamie, yeah.
Yeah.
Jamie, we saw the cuttlefish briefly, but we haven't seen others. There we go.
Yeah, I'm replaying it now. Can you guys see it now?
Yes.
Yeah, some parrotfish and those those stripy fish are sergeant majors. And this is also at Moon Island. I think this is early morning. Yeah, and this is those angelfish are called yellow bar angelfish. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're just collecting data, basic footage there that we have, but you can see, I mean, I've done thousands and thousands of dives, unless you go to certain places specifically just to come across cuttlefish mating like that. This was at the same time we saw fish spawning on the surface at night. I saw one manta ray, which, well, I've never seen, not in the UAE and not diving along the Muslim coast either. And we saw schooling either, we're not sure actually whether they're eagle rays, but we're not sure on the species because we need better footage and more time, but yeah. but on that particular, I think it was in I think it was in 2019 in May. That
correct.
particular trip, even the reef fish was spawning, and a colleague of mine runs the World Fisheries Aggregation scientific community, if you like. And I said to him, this site's unbelievable. And I haven't seen it since, but I've not seen anything like the number of fish. I've seen the coral spawning, or you see coral trout or something, but this was a number of different species spawning. So we're not even sure I'm not even sure what we saw, but it was certainly a significant event on a restored location.
Okay, so have we come to an end now?
Yeah, we'll just ask people for it. We'll just sort of stand by.
I'm going to, that's what I want to know, if they're on standby, if we can just, if people have any questions, and they can come through, if anybody's got questions.
I think maybe we need to ask Jamie to unshare his screen.
I'm trying. Yeah, I'll just leave and rejoin.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't seem to figure it
I
out.
don't know that that's necessary. If Kathleen puts her, if Kathleen just puts her, unmutes and puts her video on, we can see her for questions and answers, given how we are. I'd rather not lose you.
Right. Okay.
Kathleen, can you put your video on? Okay, and then Gary, yours, and then people can bring their questions through.
Okay, I'll come on briefly. I'm more familiar to most of our people. I think Kathleen, you may be interested to know that we pulled in a pretty good audience this evening. We have people from Qatar. In fact, we have one of our own members who's now in Qatar joining us this evening. We have folks from Abu Dhabi, and of course from Dubai and Sharjah. And we have one who I suspect, at least one who I suspect is visiting from the UK. So you pulled an international audience, and thank you also for making, in the course of your talk, some of the points that we try to make about conservation and recording and so on. Let me open the floor to questions. We have a small enough number of people that if you want to unmute and ask a question, the array that's up in front of us, we can see if you come on. Otherwise, there's the chat function. Some of you may know that there's also a raised hand function. I've never found it, so I've never used it. But if you want to try that, go from there. Michelle, do you want to handle the questions?
Yes, I mean, if anybody's got a question, go ahead. They can unmute themselves and then can go ahead. I've got a question in that the nets that Kathleen was talking about, when I go sailing off Dosk, there are so many of those nets that are still being used in Dubai. What's happening in Dubai?
Yeah, I think to tell you the truth, I think Dubai is in a position where it needs to develop on that front. And I think the challenge always is how you go about that, what sort of advice you get. And I guess because from the outside, you know, having come in from the outside, I was living in France before I moved here, and my husband was actually, I was coming in and consulting, but I wasn't living here. So coming in, I had this fresh perspective. Yes, when I went to Abu Dhabi, I was very impressed. And I think the challenging thing is I think Dubai could very easily work with Abu Dhabi and federal ministry And the issue is who pulls that together? Because for me, I think the UAE is still in a good position where it could great. For me, the idea would be to do a national marine spatial and marine protected areas program, build on the data gained from the shark assessment and the sustainable national sustainable fisheries framework, and gather further data about other all emirates. So I think a national approach would be the way to go, and that requires someone like His Excellency Sheikh Zayed to pull people together. But I think, and that's really what needs to be done. But to me, it would be for the benefit of the UAE to do that. In terms of, there's issues in terms of use as well with jet skis. And I see that at DOSC all the time, and that safety. I mean, I've been employed by council in South Australia to just look at marine use. And we did a whole management plan for all the different users and tourism operators. And it just makes things easier. People know where they lie. So jet skis are in a certain area that's away from turtles and dolphins, because we work out, if you know what I mean, and they've got their own little racetrack or whatever. And then, there's parts where you can only go on a kayak, and sailboats are in sorts of areas. So work needs to be done. Same with, I know questions coming from your group, in the discussion we had at DOSC in relation to the size of fish. And I think that's about, for me, the way I would look at it, I would look at it from a tourist perspective, and I would look at the tourism here, and I would look at it as enhancing the offering that Dubai has. I've spoken to plenty of Emiratis and people that have lived here, like Gary, for many years. I've been walking on the beach and they say, this used to be, to see coloured fish off the beach. And for me, a well-planned and effective marine protected area can bring those things back. That would make Dubai an incredible place and the UAE an incredible place. So I don't know if that helps, but the answer is more can be.
Okay, we have somebody. I'm going to ask Claudia to come on because she has a question. She'll ask the question herself.
Yeah, it's for a little bit kind of a discussion. So I'm on the boat every week once, and I'm checking birds and so on. And I see that there is in some areas a lot of fishery going on, and all the people are leaving their fishing gear, leaving their waste. And I have the feeling it would bring a lot of improvements when on every island, on every beach, some information would explain to the people, don't leave your fishing gear. It's important for the birds, because we had a couple of coincidences in the group that vets had to help some waders that were entangled into the fishing gear. So this was a huge issue in some areas, and the people just leave everything what they have on the islands. It's nice that we can use the coast of the islands, but it is, for me, actually heartbreaking when I see the bridal terns nesting below a shrub, and the shrub is decorated with plastic waste. And I often wonder, how many birds do I see and how much waste do I see? And I would really, really think, and I think it is often not even, for some people maybe, but often it is not on a bad purpose. When we go to the people and explain it to them, no one is picking up your waste, and it's really dangerous for all marine wildlife. Yeah, it is dangerous for the turtles and so on and so on. And the fishing gear is dangerous for the birds. this would really help. And I think we have many people here that are going out for fishing that don't have this nature education. They just fish for food. And I would really appreciate if there's an initiative to educate the people more regarding this. It would help. It would help really a lot, because we have, when we start, we collect not one bag of waste, we collect 100 bags of waste, and we are still not done. And it's always a surprise what you can find. Yeah, and I would personally wish that something would be done for this. And I think we have also marine species that are not so common anymore, like rays. So it should be completely forbidden to fish a ray. You can see still people collecting birds from the seabirds that are ground nesting birds. Eggs are easy to collect. I had this weekend a group of young boys trying to pick up some eggs, and they told me, yeah, we are just looking for insects. And I told them, it's forbidden by law to collect the eggs, but no one sees it, that it's forbidden. How do they know? They don't think even that they do something illegal. And this would be my wish, that something would be done in this direction.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. Did you want to say something, Kathleen? Or most thing with the fishing gear is it's lost. It's not left there. Like, let's say you were to catch a big fish, or you're trying to catch a fish and the line snaps. Eventually that hook is going to fall out of that fish and it washes up on the shore. It's not people fishing on the shore, it's the current taking it to the shore, right? So even plastic and like fishing gear as well, it's probably one of the most difficult things to manage, because it's not necessarily coming from one place, right? It could be coming from Saudi Arabia, it could be coming from Iran, it could be coming from Iraq. We don't know where the waste is coming from. So it's extremely hard to target, in my opinion.
No,
But,
I think this is not correct. Sorry for interrupting you. It might be a part of it, but when you go here to the coast and you see all the, especially, we have many Filipino people fishing, and they fish and they just leave their fishing gear with a fish that they don't want. It's even a half a fish on it.
Claudia, can I address that? I hear what you're saying. I think both what me said and what you're saying that basically there's no management of people that potentially don't understand the impacts of leaving fishing behind. They just got their one day off a week, or working and putting the fishnet out, and they leave them there. Sorry, I've just seen my cat doing something it shouldn't be doing, but anyway, I apologize. And my loud outside, by the way, with birds at all. But yeah, no. So I for me, part of a whole program, you have to look at who are the holders, who are the people, and these groups, the Filipino or the person, the Pakistani or whoever it is that's just their way on some tiny way that is way beyond them compressed. There's ways these strategy, and it requires a plan. Like, you need to, first of all, I'm a great believer in schools, and I'm also a great believer in women influencing change. So me running a schools program in Dubai, for example, we did some work with Jess when we introduced them to the Great Barrier Reef. We were even looking to do some exchanges, but getting the behind that, when they can go and ski in Verbier, or it can be quite challenging. And that's why the way I look at it, it's got to be either, it's got to be passionate like yourself, and I always also say to people, if you have a passion about a certain thing, feel that you have some capacity difference, because you're already a member of this group, you're already out there, and it is challenging because we can't talk about, I guess, you can't share the picture of the terns or the picture of the tree with the rubbish and the you know, and the terns underneath, or but we can certainly do the things you did in terms of educating the children and people we meet and the groups we meet. But I think it really requires programs to do these. They require, you know, you require Filipinos, you require the Indians, you require engagement with these workers who are doing that to be the voice, to be the ambassador for their group. And that's an engagement program that then they have their own champions. It's a bit, it's become very big, you know, like you see groups of all nations out there. So that's what you need. In my view, that's what you need. You need to have people within those communities being the champions, not coming along and telling us, training them to train people.
Yeah.
It's just
and you need to be able to share more widely what's happening. That needs to be somehow addressed, because I think in the end, the tourism dollar is being driven more towards authenticity, and in terms of the younger generations, and so Dubai needs to be able to share it has incredible captive breeding program for the oryx. I think that with the oryx and the gazelles now as well with the disease, but they can do it if they do an amazing job with COVID. If they really, if we find the right people, and I think we all need to use our sphere of influence. I've tried many times to get into the MOE with, I knew Majid, who was the advisor, but then he's no longer there. You know, I have tried to work with ministries. I've certainly engaged in surveys I've done and things like that, but they need money to do it, and they need a strategic. That is an engagement program, you know, a communications, an app, these sorts of things. You need a big behind it. It needs to be understood that it's going to be for the benefit of the country from a tourism perspective in the future, particularly vis-a-vis Saudi, if they off protecting the marine environment, protecting the environment more than potentially the UAE has. So I don't know if that helps, but I hear
one
you.
more question, because we are running late. So I'm just going to let Asper come and ask a question, because we're running late. So let Asper ask a question and we'll close up.
Okay, thank you guys for this very interesting talk. I'm very happy to hear a lot of the things that you're saying. The positive steps towards nature protection, of course. And I wanted to ask you to briefly, very briefly, a few words to talk about the closed loop agriculture in relation to ocean health. How does that look like? How do they close off the runoff?
Right, they basically, they'd have to filter everything. So, like, really, as like simple as possible, you look at it like a fish tank, right? You're taking the fish out of the water and controlling the environment, like, in every way. But you're not letting the water from the tanks go back into the sea. So there's no exchange between environments. Therefore, mitigating any negative effects on the ocean.
It's under development. I was with the Norwegian contingent, and they're actually part of the UN Global Compact for the Oceans. They are developing a closed system. I don't know the science fully behind it. It's still in process, as far as I understand. I was just trying to find you a picture of it, but me later if you would like.
Yes, please. So what I'm trying to understand is that something that like a regular, farm can easily do, or this is something that needs advanced design and a lot of thinking and resources put behind it?
Not even. You just need to be able to control the water quality throughout the system constantly without putting new water into the system, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.
Like, you're not,
That doesn't mean it's easy.
No,
no.
I'm not sure it is, but there's definitely work being done on it.
Okay, there's just one more question, and then after this question from Theory, we'll close on. Theory, would you like to ask your question? He's not coming through. Basically, he was saying can you elaborate on the nuisances caused by jet skis? People tend to think that they're harmless to the environment.
So jet skis, a number of things. One is noise. So many marine creatures are very sensitive to noise. There's new studies out of CAUS talking about even smaller creatures, corals and things like that. They're seeing them in real time respond to sound. Whales are very sensitive to noise and vibration. Sharks, they sense where they're going based on vibration, rays. So the noise is one thing. The other thing is boat strike. So I've come out of the sailing club and seen a huge, very old green turtle completely, sadly disemboweled, and I did send it straight to the ministry. But and since then they've been working on turtle projects, I will say. But boat strike, all these sorts of things. So for me, jet skis, they impact how you feel when you listen to a jet ski. Unless you're the person potentially enjoying it, most of the noise and that is disruptive to the animals. So boat strike and noise.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen. I'm going to end off now. Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. I'll let Gary take over from me just to end off the meeting, and I think that's it for the evening. Gary, over to you.
I'm going to say thank you to Kathleen and to Jamie, and
you, Jamie.
As a result of presenting to us, you're going to be with us, or we're going to be with you at least for the coming year, because we're putting you on our rolls, and you'll be getting our newsletter, so you'll have a chance to see for yourself what observations we're out there making or not. We are not, I should say, we are not an advocacy or an NGO sort of group. Our mission is essentially strictly educational, but we've filled a niche successfully for more than 35 years now, more than 40 years in Abu Dhabi. So thank you very much for your presentation. These are big issues, and listening to you reminds me maybe that number one, I'm glad that I'm retired, and number two, I think the best I can wish you is that you find yourself working, and governments find themselves putting in place people to handle these issues who are people with open minds, not only open to other views, but ready to learn and eager to learn, because there are lots of countervailing factors for all the decisions that are to be made. For our members, keep an eye out for the details of next month's meeting, which will be our AGM, at which we will be electing the the new committee. We most of the members have agreed to stand for re-election. We will be having a happy change, but I'm going to save that announcement for another occasion. So thank you very much, everybody. We look forward to seeing you next month. I may or may not be joining you for next month. I will have to try to connect from my school in Nepal, and that's it's often a challenge just to get onto the internet. But anyway, we as a group will be seeing you next month. So thanks again to Kathleen and to Jamie, and we look forward to seeing all of the rest of you at our June meeting. Thanks a lot. Good night.
Thank you. Good night. And thank you, Jamie and Kathleen, and good night, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good night.